All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling two philosophical heavyweights, Buddhism and Nietzsche.
Wow. Yeah. Big thinkers.
And they might seem like, well, total opposites, right?
Mm.
Like Buddhist selflessness, that whole letting go thing, versus Nietzsche's self-assertion, the will to power. But is there any common ground there? That's what we're going to find out.
It's fascinating because both of them are wrestling with the same big questions
Yeah.
about suffering and the self. Like, what's the meaning of all this anyway? They just come at it from totally different directions.
Different sides of the same coin, maybe?
Yeah, like they're looking at the same mountain range, but from opposite ends of the valley.
Okay, so let's get down to earth for a second. Imagine you see someone really struggling. Maybe they lost their job, going through a breakup, something tough. What's your gut reaction?
I think for a lot of people, it's compassion, right? Like we want to help ease their pain. And that impulse is at the heart of what Buddhists call karun, this deep, active compassion. But it's not just feeling sorry for someone.
It's more than that.
Yeah, it's rooted in understanding. And Buddhism really stresses that this should apply to everyone, not just the people we like.
Okay, but wouldn't Nietzsche say, wait a minute, too much coddling makes people weak?
He might. I mean, the will to power, his big idea, isn't about dominating others, not really. But it's about mastering yourself, pushing your limits. Even suffering, for Nietzsche, could be like fuel for growth.
So he wasn't totally heartless.
No, it's not that he lacked compassion, but he saw it differently, worried that too much pity keeps people stuck, reinforces their weakness, instead of saying, hey, you can rise above this.
So how do we reconcile that? Being compassionate, but also encouraging that ambition, that drive to excel.
Yeah, is it even possible? Maybe it's not an either thing. Maybe there's a way to cultivate both inner strength and that empathy.
Like a martial artist, maybe.
Yeah.
They train rigorously to master their own power, but there's also a respect for their opponent, a code of conduct.
I like that analogy. It makes you think about how both philosophies deal with suffering itself. Buddhism is upfront about it, right? Suffering is part of life, the dukkha concept. The goal isn't to avoid it, but to understand it. Why are we attached to things that cause us pain?
And ultimately finding a way to be free from it.
Exactly. And the Four Noble Truths kind of give you a framework. First, acknowledge that suffering exists, no escaping that. Then you got to see it comes from clinging to desires, to things that are temporary. Third, you realize the suffering can actually be overcome. And finally, you follow the Eightfold Path, that way of living that leads to liberation.
But Nietzsche famously said, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. He seems to embrace suffering almost.
It does seem that way, yeah. But there's a similarity too. Both philosophies see suffering as transformative. Buddhism says detach from it, find liberation. Nietzsche says use it to overcome yourself, forge something stronger from the fire.
So maybe it's about accepting what we can't change and having that drive to push beyond our limits.
Maybe. Like navigating a river, Gotta adjust to the current, but also steer the boat towards where you want to go.
Love that image. So, morality. Buddhism is big on altruism, right? Acting for the benefit of others, kindness, non-harming.
Ahimsa is the term, that principle of nonviolence. And it's not just physical, but cultivating this deep respect for all life forms. Buddhism, it encourages you to see we're all connected, part of this huge web. Act with compassion, even to those who might be considered enemies.
Okay, now Nietzsche throws a curveball. His idea of master morality is like, forget those rule books, define your own values.
Right. He challenges the whole self-denial thing, argues that following those handed-down rules can stifle individual potential. True morality for him comes from within. You figure out your place in the world, and you live by that.
So is it Buddhism saying fit in and be kind, while Nietzsche says stand out and be bold? How do we reconcile that?
Well, maybe that tension itself is useful, makes us examine our own values. Are we just following a script someone else wrote, or are we choosing our own path?
Are we growing, evolving, or are we just afraid to stand out, afraid of judgment? This all gets me thinking about the ego. Buddhism often sees that as an illusion, something to transcend. Meditation is all about dissolving the ego, recognizing the self is impermanent.
Yeah, like a wave in the ocean. It rises and falls, but it's part of something much bigger.
But Nietzsche sees the ego as the engine of creativity, ambition, not about denying it, but harnessing its power.
He'd say it needs careful steering, for sure, but it's that source of will to power, that drive to overcome. Suppressing the ego, he thinks, that leads to stagnation. Embrace it, and you can achieve extraordinary things.
So we've got dissolve the ego on one hand and empower the ego on the other. Two totally different recipes for life.
Maybe it's not picking one, though. Maybe the ego is a tool. We can cultivate self-awareness so we're not slaves to it, but we can also use its energy to fuel our creativity, our ambition.
I like that the ego as a tool makes it seem less like an all or nothing thing.
Exactly. Finding that balance, right? Where we can have inner peace, but also embrace our individuality, our drive to be great.
All right, so let's talk power. In Buddhism, it's often tied to wisdom, compassion, and action. Like the Buddha himself, he gave up worldly power to find enlightenment, then dedicated his life to helping others.
Right. It's not about dominating others or getting rich. It's about understanding reality and using that wisdom to ease suffering, the power of compassion, of inner peace, letting go of that grasping ego.
But Nietzsche has a very different view, right? With his master morality, it's individuals defining their own values, not bound by conventional rules.
Yeah, he's not saying be ruthless,
Yeah.
but he wants us to think critically. Where do our values come from? And do we have the courage to live authentically, even if it means going against the grain?
So compassionate power versus self-created power. Can we be both powerful and ethical? Where's the line between what we want and our responsibility to others?
Tough questions, right? Maybe true power comes from understanding ourselves, A&D, the world around us. Using our strengths to make things better, create something valuable, and recognizing that, in the end, we're all connected, can't thrive in isolation.
This is making me think about the paths each philosophy offers. Buddhism talks about enlightenment, reaching the state of peace, wisdom, freedom from suffering, like transcending that cycle of birth and death.
It's inner cultivation, quieting the mind, understanding that everything changes, and ultimately finding liberation in that understanding.
But Nietzsche doesn't have that kind of end goal, does he? It's more about constantly striving, pushing limits, creating yourself anew. His idea of eternal recurrence, life repeating infinitely, it's like a challenge to live a life you'd willingly repeat, even the hard parts.
Makes you think, right? Are we truly living a life that's meaningful? Are we making choices we'd be proud to repeat, or just drifting along?
So Buddhism says find peace, liberation from suffering. Nietzsche says embrace the challenge, become stronger, more authentic. Two very different paths.
Fascinating how two contrasting approaches can both offer these profound insights. And maybe, just maybe, there's a way to bring them together. A middle ground where we cultivate peace, A&D, that drive for self-overcoming.
Yeah, it's a real journey, this whole philosophy thing. And it gets even trickier when we start talking about love and pity, right? Because those seem like simple emotions. But Buddhism and Nietzsche, they've got some really nuanced takes on them.
Okay, I'm all ears. Lay it on me. I mean, with Buddhism, when I think of love, the first thing that pops into my head is metta, right? That universal loving kindness. It's a pretty radical idea when you really think about it.
It is. It goes way beyond just personal attachments, not just romantic love or family. It's this care and concern for literally everything that's alive, no matter who they are, what they've done. So it's like unconditional love on a cosmic scale.
Yeah, exactly. And along with that, you've got karua, which is compassion, feeling the suffering of others like it's your own and wanting to help. But Buddhism doesn't really emphasize pity in the same way we usually think of it.
Oh, that's interesting. So what's the difference?
Well, pity can sometimes create this distance, even a sense of, I'm better off than you. It's looking down instead of truly connecting. Buddhism wants us to be more empathetic, to recognize that we're all in this together, sharing these human experiences.
So instead of pity, it's more about understanding and genuine connection.
Yeah, seeing our shared humanity. And then responding not just with feelings, but with wise action to actually ease that suffering.
Okay, but Nietzsche, he probably flipped that whole script, wouldn't he? Didn't he see pity as something that weakens people?
He did. He thought it reinforces that feeling of helplessness. Instead of pushing someone to rise above their problems, it kind of keeps them stuck.
So where Buddhism encourages us to act compassionately, to alleviate suffering, Nietzsche might say, help them find their own strength. Don't just feel sorry for them.
Right. He was all about inspiring greatness. Not just offering sympathy, but challenging people to become the best versions of themselves. Which makes me think about those iconic figures each philosophy has. For Buddhism, you have the bodhisattva, right? An enlightened being who could just escape the cycle of suffering. But they choose to stick around and help others reach enlightenment too.
So selfless. It's like they're saying, I made it to the top of the mountain, but I'm not leaving anyone behind.
Exactly. And then you've got Nietzsche's Übermensch, sometimes translated as Superman or Overman. This figure embodies strength, independence, creating your own values.
Yeah, the Übermensch isn't bound by those conventional rules. They forge their own path, embrace the tough stuff, strive for greatness. It's like they're saying, I'm going to make my own mountaintop.
I love that. It's about pushing the limits of what humans can do, shaping your destiny with this powerful will.
So two contrasting figures, the Bodhisattva, all about selflessness and compassion, and the Übermensch, embracing strength, self-creation, almost like two different paths to heroism, you know?
It really is. And it's a good question to think about. Which one speaks to you more? What qualities do you want to cultivate in your own life?
Makes me think about freedom, too. In Buddhism, it seems like freedom is about detachment, letting go of the desires and attachments that cause all that suffering.
Yeah, recognizing that everything is impermanent, even the self. Buddhist freedom comes from accepting the ups and downs, realizing that clinging to things only creates pain.
But for Nietzsche, it's all about creative will, right? Having the power to shape your own life, create new values, be bold, be authentic. Like he's saying, don't just accept the world, go out and change it.
Exactly. Instead of trying to detach from the world, he wants us to engage with it fully. Take risks, make our mark.
So is freedom about letting go
Yeah.
or taking control? Is it about transcending the world or shaping it according to your will? Two very different approaches.
They are different, but maybe they're two sides of the same coin. Maybe real freedom needs both detachment and that creative will. Like finding that sweet spot where you're not clinging to things that cause suffering, but you're also not afraid to go for what you want.
Makes sense. Like
Yeah.
you need a clear mind to even see the possibilities, but then you need the drive to actually go after them.
It's this dance between acceptance and action, letting go and taking charge.
All right, so let's zoom out for a minute. Look at how these ideas play out in society. Buddhism, with all that emphasis on compassion and connection, seems to point towards a vision of harmony, right?
Yeah, it's about recognizing we're all in this together. Cooperation, putting the well-being of everyone first. Kindness, nonviolence, that pursuit of happiness for all.
But Nietzsche, with his Übermensch and the focus on individual strength, he seems to challenge that idea of everyone being equal. Like he believes in a hierarchy where the strong and creative lead the way.
He does. He wasn't a fan of systems that squashed ambition, that valued conformity above all else. He thought that stifles progress, limits what humans can achieve. His vision is a society where exceptional people can really excel, push the boundaries, and inspire others to greatness.
It's like asking, what kind of society do we want to live in? One that prioritizes harmony and well-being for everyone, or one that celebrates individual achievement, the drive to be the best?
Big question, right? Maybe the ideal is somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's about balancing those individual dreams with a sense of responsibility towards others. Can we have a society where people are free to chase their own goals, but they also recognize that we're all connected and we need to work together for the common good?
That's a tough needle to thread, isn't it? It's like trying to create a symphony where every instrument gets its solo, but it all blends together beautifully. Which leads me to think about, where does all this lead? What are these philosophies ultimately pointing towards?
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
Right.
All these different ways of looking at the same big questions.
It's kind of mind-blowing. Like we started with this stark contrast, right? Buddhist selflessness versus Nietzsche's whole self-assertion thing. But the deeper we go, the more shades of gray there are.
That's the fun part, right? It's not just black and white. And that's what's so cool about really diving into these philosophies. They both offer so much insight into what it means to be human, even if they take different paths to get there.
So let's recap this philosophical tug-of-war. Buddhism, we've got compassion, letting go of attachments, that whole search for liberation from suffering.
Inner peace, wisdom, really understanding how connected we all are.
And then Nietzsche, it's all about creating yourself, that will to power, pushing through challenges to become stronger, more true to who you are.
Yeah, embracing that individuality, going after what you want, shaping your own destiny.
So are these two philosophies going to be forever at odds? Like oil and water, they'll never mix?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I don't think there's a simple answer. But what's really exciting is the possibility of finding that middle ground.
Like, can we be both the calm at the center of the storm, A&E, the force that's shaping the weather? Can we have inner peace, A&D, still strive for greatness, compassion, AD, ambition?
It's a balancing act, that's for sure. But I think it's a dance worth learning. Imagine a life where you've got that deep sense of peace, that connection to everything, but you're also driven by this passion to create, to grow, to make a real difference in the world.
Yeah, combining the best of both worlds almost.
Exactly. And maybe that's the key takeaway here. It's not about picking a side. These philosophies, they're more like lenses we can use to see the world, each one giving us a unique perspective.
Like having a whole toolkit for living. You choose the right tool for the job.
Love that. And just like any skilled craftsperson, sometimes we need one tool, sometimes another. Maybe we need that quiet Buddhist meditation to get centered, but other times it's Nietzsche's fire that pushes us forward.
Well, as we wrap up this philosophical adventure, I want to say thanks for being such a great guide. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about Buddhism and Nietzsche, but about how to approach life's big questions.
It's been awesome exploring with you. And remember, the journey doesn't stop here. Keep asking those questions, keep digging deeper.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas too. See what speaks to you, what resonates. Maybe it's the serenity of Buddhism, the boldness of Nietzsche, or your own unique blend of both. The most important thing is to keep searching, keep growing, and keep living a life that feels true to you. Until next time, happy philosophizing.